Some houses do not wait for the living, they wait for the brokenhearted, holding their breath through 50 winters until the right man finally loses everything and has nowhere else to go. The rain came down over Millbrook, Maine, in thin silver lines that blurred the sawmill yard into a watercolor of wet gravel, stacked pine, and rusted chain-link fence. Owen Mercer stood beneath the gray afternoon sky with a cardboard box tucked against his ribs, the kind of box men carry when a place has decided it no longer has room for them. Inside were 6 years of small belongings, a dented thermos, a pair of work gloves darkened by oil, a folded flannel shirt, a cracked photo of his old army unit, and a brass nameplate from his locker that simply read Mercer. The foreman had not been cruel. That almost made it worse. He had looked down at the papers on his desk, cleared his throat, and said the company was downsizing, automation was changing things, younger hands were faster, insurance was getting complicated, nothing personal. Owen had nodded because veterans learned early that not every wound came with noise. Some arrived quietly, wearing a company logo and carrying a final paycheck. He was 40 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a square white face weathered by sun, wind, and years of keeping his thoughts behind his teeth. Dark blonde hair, touched with gray at the temples, curled damply beneath the brim of his faded cap. A week of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his blue-gray eyes had the faraway steadiness of a man who could read a storm before it reached the ridge. He had served as an Army combat engineer, the kind of soldier who built bridges under pressure, restored water lines in dust-choked villages, repaired generators by flashlight, and learned to trust the small sounds most people ignored. Back home, those skills had been useful only until they were not. Now the mill door closed behind him with a soft metal click, and the sound traveled through his chest like the last nail in a board. Across the parking lot, his old green Ford pickup waited beneath a sagging maple tree, its paint dulled by salt and miles, its windshield filmed with rain. In the passenger seat sat Atlas, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, a strong chest, high ears, and amber eyes bright enough to catch light even on a day without sun. Atlas had once worked search and rescue with soldiers who measured hope by seconds, scent, and silence. He knew the difference between thunder and trouble. He knew the sound Owen's breathing made when the past stepped too close. As Owen crossed the lot, Atlas rose from the seat and pressed one paw against the inside of the door, not impatient, not excited, simply present. That was his gift. He did not ask a man to explain what he could barely survive. Owen opened the truck door and placed the box behind the seat. For a moment he stood there, rain gathering on his jacket, staring at the empty space where his next plan should have been. The mill had been the last solid thing. Rent was already late. The bank had called twice. His savings would not cover another month in town, not with winter sharpening itself beyond the pines. Atlas leaned forward and touched his cold nose to Owen's wrist. Owen let out a breath that almost became a laugh but did not have the strength. "Yeah, boy," he murmured. "I know." He climbed in, and the cab wrapped around him with familiar smells: wet dog, old coffee, engine oil, pine dust, the faint leather scent of a service leash folded in the glove box. Rain tapped the roof in a patient rhythm, and for a while Owen did not start the engine. He only sat with both hands resting on the wheel, watching workers hurry to their cars with lunch coolers and hooded jackets, men who still had somewhere to be in the morning. A memory flickered at the edge of his mind, a temporary bridge at dawn, boots in mud, a sergeant telling him that a good structure did not need to be beautiful, only faithful. Owen wondered when he had stopped feeling like either. Then his phone vibrated in the cup holder. He almost ignored it. Unknown numbers usually meant bills, wrong numbers, or people selling relief to men who could not afford hope. But Atlas turned his head sharply toward the sound, ears lifting as if the call itself carried a scent. Owen picked it up. "Mercer," he said, voice low. The woman on the other end spoke with the measured care of someone accustomed to delivering news that changed the shape of a life. Her name was Denise Callahan, attorney at law, calling from Aroostook County. She asked if he was Owen Daniel Mercer, son of William Mercer. At the sound of his father's name, Owen's fingers tightened around the phone. William had been gone 9 years, buried beneath a white stone on a quiet hillside, taking most of his stories with him. "That's me," Owen said. Rain slid down the windshield in crooked rivers. The attorney paused, then explained that an elderly widow named Margaret Ellison had passed away 2 weeks earlier. Owen did not know the name. Or he thought he did not. But Denise continued, saying Mrs. Ellison had left specific instructions, notarized years ago and updated every November like a prayer she refused to stop repeating. She had left Owen a cabin on Coldwater Ridge, 12 acres of pine and birch, and a small dock on the northern edge of Coldwater Lake. No debt attached. No mortgage. Taxes paid through spring. Owen stared through the glass at the mill yard, suddenly unable to understand ordinary things like rain, gravel, breath. There must be a mistake, he said. I never met her. The attorney's voice softened. Mrs. Ellison wrote a letter for you. She said your father kept his promise there, and now she was asking you to keep the last part. Outside, a forklift beeped somewhere beyond the lumber stacks, small and distant, like a sound from another life. Atlas lowered himself slowly into the passenger seat, but his eyes stayed fixed on Owen, calm and watchful. Owen looked down at the cardboard box, at the nameplate, at the final paycheck folded beneath his gloves. Fired and broke, with less than half a tank of gas and nowhere good to sleep by Friday, he had just inherited a cabin from a dead woman who knew his father's secrets. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the old soldier's caution rise in him, the quiet instinct that every gift had weight, every locked door had a reason, and some places did not call you because they were empty. They called because something inside them had been waiting too long. Owen thanked the attorney, wrote down the address on the back of his termination notice, and ended the call. For several seconds he sat without moving. Then Atlas gave one low, gentle whine and placed his paw on Owen's knee. Not a command. Not comfort exactly. More like recognition. Owen turned the key. The truck coughed, shuddered, then came alive. As he pulled out of the sawmill lot, the rain softened over the windshield, and the road north opened between dark pines and pale fields fading into mist. Behind him lay the life that had closed its door. Ahead, somewhere beyond 90 miles of county roads and cold woods, stood a cabin he had never seen, holding a letter from a stranger, a promise from his father, and a secret buried deep enough to survive 50 years of silence. The road north carried Owen Mercer away from Millbrook slowly, as if the town itself did not want to release him all at once. The rain followed for the first 30 miles, tracing silver lines down the windshield while the wipers moved with the tired rhythm of an old metronome. Atlas sat upright beside him, broad chest steady, amber eyes watching the passing woods with the silent attention of a soldier on a night watch. The truck heater clicked and breathed warm air that smelled faintly of dust, pine shavings, and the wool blanket folded behind the seat. Owen kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the paper where he had written the address, though he had already memorized it. Coldwater Ridge. 12 acres. Northern edge of the lake. A name from nowhere, handed to him on the same afternoon the world had taken away his last paycheck. He did not turn on the radio. Some men filled silence because they feared what it might say back. Owen had learned to sit inside it, to measure it, to notice the small things hidden there, the soft shift of Atlas changing weight, the hiss of tires through wet leaves, the hollow plunk from the glove box every time the truck dipped over a frost heave. By the time the county road narrowed, the rain had thinned into mist. Low clouds dragged across the black spruce and red maple hills, and the last colors of fall clung to the branches like old letters no one had found the courage to throw away. Small Maine towns passed in quiet frames, a white church with a crooked steeple, a diner with fogged windows and a hand-painted sign for blueberry pie, a Veterans of Foreign Wars hall with a flag moving gently in the damp air. Owen slowed when he saw it. Not because he planned to stop, but because his eyes always found those places. The halls. The plaques. The folded flags in glass cases. The photographs of men smiling before they knew which parts of themselves would not come home. He had spent years avoiding ceremonies, yet every roadside memorial still reached for him in a language deeper than words. Atlas turned his head toward the flag and gave a quiet breath through his nose. Owen glanced at him and almost smiled. You see everything, do you not? The dog blinked once, solemn as a judge. In the service, Atlas had been trained to search collapsed structures, locate hidden spaces, and respond to changes in human stress that machines could not always understand. But Owen believed the dog had learned something else too, something no manual could teach. Atlas could sense when a room had old sorrow in it. He could feel when a man was standing at the edge of himself. Many nights, when Owen woke in a cold sweat with no danger around him, Atlas would already be there, his head pressed against Owen's chest, steady and warm, as if lending him a heartbeat until his own remembered how to behave. The road rose into higher country. Mailboxes grew farther apart. Houses disappeared behind stands of pine and birch. The pavement became patched and uneven, then turned to a gravel lane that wound between stone walls half swallowed by moss. Owen checked the address again under the dim light from the dashboard. 5 more miles. The attorney had said there would be a green gate, then a private road, then the cabin near the water. She had also said Margaret Ellison had been very clear about one thing. Owen was not to sign anything away until he had spent at least one night there. That detail had lodged in him like a splinter. Why would a woman he had never met care whether he stayed one night in a cabin? Why had she known his father? Why had she waited until death to speak? His father, William Mercer, had been a quiet man, a lineman by trade, a veteran by history, and a keeper of locked drawers by nature. He taught Owen how to sharpen a blade, replace a fuse, listen for bad bearings in an engine, and treat a dog with respect. But he rarely spoke of the years before Owen was born. There had been a photograph once, tucked inside a Bible, of William standing beside a younger woman near a lake. Owen remembered asking about it when he was 12. His father had closed the Bible gently and said, "Some promises are not stories yet." At the time, Owen thought grown men said things like that to avoid answering children. Now, driving through the wet woods toward a cabin left by a stranger, the sentence returned with the weight of a door beginning to open. Dusk came early under the trees. The truck headlights reached ahead in pale cones, catching the white trunks of birches and the shine of puddles gathered in ruts. Atlas shifted suddenly, his ears rising. Owen noticed at once. The dog was not alarmed, but focused. His nose lifted toward the cracked window, drawing in the cold air. A few seconds later, Owen saw the gate. It leaned between 2 granite posts, painted a dark green that had weathered almost black. A rusted metal sign hung from one chain, the letters barely visible beneath lichen, Coldwater Ridge. Owen stopped the truck. The engine idled roughly in the quiet. Beyond the gate, the private road climbed through dense pines toward a strip of silver light that might have been the lake. For a moment, he did not move. The place did not look abandoned. It looked patient. That was the word that came to him, though he did not know why. Patient, like an old veteran sitting by a window with something important folded in his hand. Owen stepped out into the damp evening. Gravel crunched beneath his boots, and the air smelled of wet cedar, cold water, and wood smoke so faint it might have been memory. Atlas jumped down beside him, landing softly despite his size. He did not run ahead. He stood close to Owen's left leg, looking past the gate into the trees. Owen unlocked the chain with the key the attorney had told him to collect from a small lockbox beside the post. The key turned harder than it should have, then gave with a tired click. As he pushed the gate open, the hinges let out a low, aching sound that drifted through the woods and vanished into the mist. Atlas stepped forward first, nose low, then stopped after 3 paces and looked back. Owen knew that look. It was not fear. It was invitation. He returned to the truck, drove through, and closed the gate behind them. The final stretch of road was narrow, bordered by ferns browned by frost and boulders slick with moss. When the trees finally parted, the cabin appeared below them, small and dark against the pale surface of Coldwater Lake. It sat on a gentle slope above the shore, built of old timber gone gray with time, with a stone chimney rising from one side and a covered porch facing the water. The roof was patched in places, the windows clouded, the steps bowed slightly in the middle. Yet something about it held together with stubborn grace, the way certain people did after years of weather. Owen parked near a split rail fence and cut the engine. Silence rushed in at once, deep and clean. No mill machinery. No traffic. No voices from the yard. Only water touching stones below, a crow calling from somewhere across the ridge, and the soft breathing of Atlas beside him. Owen looked at the cabin for a long time. He had arrived with no expectations, no hope he trusted, and no reason to believe an old building could mean anything more than shelter. But as the last light faded over the lake, he felt a strange pressure behind his ribs, not pain exactly, but recognition. As though some part of him that had been standing outside in the rain for years had just seen a lamp burning in a window. He opened the truck door. Atlas leapt down and moved toward the porch with careful steps, his paws silent on the wet earth. Halfway there, the dog stopped. His ears tilted toward the cabin. His body became still from nose to tail. Owen followed his gaze to the north wall, where the logs were darker, older, almost black beneath the eaves. Nothing moved. No sound came from inside. Yet Atlas stared as if someone beneath the floor had whispered his name. Owen held the cabin key in his palm and felt its cold teeth press into his skin. "All right," he said softly, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to the dog, the house, or the father who had somehow led him here. "Let us see what she wanted us to find." Owen climbed the porch steps slowly, testing each board before trusting his weight to it. The wood gave a tired groan beneath his boots, not a warning exactly, more like the sound an old man made when standing after too many hours in the cold. Atlas stayed beside him, close enough that Owen could feel the warmth of the dog's shoulder against his leg. The cabin door was painted a deep forest green, chipped along the edges where seasons had worried at it with rain, snow, and sun. A brass knocker in the shape of a pine cone hung at eye level, tarnished nearly black, and beneath it someone had once carved a small cross into the doorframe with the point of a knife. Owen touched it without meaning to. The mark was shallow, almost hidden beneath old varnish, but his thumb found the groove as if it had been waiting for him. He slid the key into the lock. For a moment it resisted, then turned with a soft click that sounded too large in the evening stillness. When the door opened, the smell of the cabin came out to meet him: cedar, dust, cold ashes, lake air, and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender folded into a drawer years ago and forgotten. Owen stepped inside. The room held the last blue light of dusk in its windows. A stone fireplace stood against the north wall, broad and simple, its hearth swept clean. Two worn armchairs faced it, their fabric faded but intact. A braided rug covered the center of the plank floor, and along the far wall stood a narrow bookshelf with weathered spines, mason jars, a kerosene lamp, and framed photographs turned slightly away from the room as if embarrassed by their own memories. Atlas entered after him, nose moving through the air in slow, careful pulls. The dog did not explore with excitement. He worked the room the way he had been trained to work a field site, reading scent, temperature, space, and silence. Owen set his box on the kitchen table. The table was old maple, scarred by knife marks and water rings, but polished by hands that had used it with love. On top of it lay a large cream envelope with his name written in dark blue ink. Owen Daniel Mercer. The handwriting was elegant, steady, and old-fashioned, the letters formed by someone who believed words deserved patience. He stood looking at it for longer than he needed to. Outside, the lake touched the stones below the cabin in soft, even breaths. Atlas circled once, then sat beside the table and looked up at him. Owen removed his cap, placed it on the chair, and opened the envelope with his thumb. Inside was a single letter, 3 pages long, written on thick stationery that smelled faintly of paper, cedar, and thyme. The first line made him sit down before he realized his niece had asked for it. "Dear Owen, if this letter has reached you, then I have gone home to God, and the cabin has finally come to the man it was meant to shelter." He read slowly, his eyes moving over each line while the quiet deepened around him. Margaret Ellison wrote that she had known his father in the summer of 1974, when Coldwater Ridge was still home to fishermen, mill workers, and families who gathered at the lake on Sundays after church. William Mercer had arrived there as a young veteran with a toolbox, a stubborn sense of duty, and grief he did not yet know how to name. He had helped repair docks after spring floods, fixed the generator at the church hall, and spent evenings at this very cabin with a small circle of people Margaret called the ones who came home different. Owen paused there. His father had never used words like that. He had never said he was lonely after the service. He had only woken early, worked hard, and kept the garage light on late into the night. Margaret's letter continued. She wrote that William had kept a promise on this land, a promise made to a man named Samuel Reed, and that the truth had been protected here because the world, at the time, had not been ready to receive it gently. Owen leaned back, feeling the chair creak beneath him. Samuel Reed. The name stirred nothing in him, yet the room seemed to grow colder around it. Atlas stood and walked toward the fireplace. His nails clicked softly on the planks. He lowered his head near the hearth, sniffed the seam where stone met wood, then lifted his eyes to the north wall again. Owen noticed, but the letter held him. Margaret wrote that she had watched Owen from a distance over the years, not in a strange way, but through small pieces of news his father had shared before he passed: Owen joining the army, Owen becoming an engineer, Owen returning home with a loyal German shepherd in the same quiet heaviness William had once carried. She apologized for waiting. She said some stories required the right hands, not just brave ones. The final paragraph was shorter than the rest. Your father believed broken things could be repaired if a man had patience, light, and the humility to listen. This cabin will not make you rich, Owen. That was never its purpose. But it may give you back something the world has been taking from you, piece by piece. Spend one night here before you decide what to do. Let Atlas listen. He will hear what people have forgotten. Owen read the last sentence twice. Let Atlas listen. At the sound of his name, the dog gave a low breath and pressed one paw against the edge of the braided rug. Not hard. Just once. A deliberate touch. Owen folded the letter carefully, though his fingers felt numb. He looked around the cabin with new eyes. The turned photographs on the shelf. The swept hearth. The old rug placed precisely in the center of the floor. The north wall where Atlas kept staring. This was not just a place left behind by an elderly widow. It had been arranged. Prepared. Preserved like a room waiting for a witness. Owen rose and crossed to the bookshelf. One by one, he turned the photographs toward the window light. The first showed Margaret as a young woman standing beside the lake, smiling beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The second showed the cabin in summer, its porch crowded with people holding paper cups and plates of food. The third made the air leave Owen's chest. His father stood near the same stone fireplace, young and lean, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, one hand resting on a toolbox. Beside him was Margaret, and beside her stood a man Owen did not recognize, with gentle eyes, dark hair, and a folded flag tucked under one arm. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, William, Margaret, and Samuel. Coldwater Ridge. Before the silence. Owen held the photograph until the edges warmed under his fingers. Behind him, Atlas suddenly rose to his full height. His ears sharpened. His body angled toward the floor near the fireplace. 3 soft taps followed, paw against wood, evenly spaced. Owen turned. The dog stared at him, amber eyes bright in the dim room, then lowered his nose to the seam beneath the braided rug. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Owen set the photograph on the table, walked slowly to Atlas, and knelt beside him. Beneath his palm, the plank floor felt colder than the rest of the room. He pressed gently. From somewhere below, so faint he almost missed it, came a hollow answer. Owen kept his palm pressed to the floor until the cold seemed to climb through his skin and settle into the bones of his hand. The hollow sound had not been loud. It was not the kind of thing a careless man would notice, not under the creak of an old cabin, not with the lake breathing against the stones outside and the wind drawing thin fingers across the windows. But Owen had spent too many years listening for what the ground tried to hide. He knew the difference between solid earth and empty space. He knew the way a room changed when there was another room beneath it. Atlas stood over the seam on the floorboards, his head lowered, ears forward, every muscle held in quiet discipline. The dog did not bark. He only waited, as if the discovery belonged to Owen now. A fine dust clung to the braided rug when Owen pulled it back. The colors beneath were darker, protected from years of sun, deep red, muted gold, a blue nearly faded to gray. Under it, the planks ran north to south, all except one narrow board near the hearth that had been cut shorter than the rest. Owen ran his fingers along the edge. There was no handle, no ring, no obvious latch. Whoever had built it had wanted the floor to look ordinary. He glanced toward the kitchen, found a butter knife in the drawer, and returned to the hearth. The knife slid into the seam with a thin scrape. The board resisted, then lifted a fraction of an inch. Atlas shifted his weight, a soft whine rising in his throat. Easy, Owen whispered. We are only listening. He worked slowly, careful not to split the old wood. The board came free with a sigh of dust and dry air. Beneath it was not a staircase, not yet, but a shallow metal pole recessed into a second panel. Owen sat back on his heels. The pole was made of iron, dark with age, but still sound. Around it, someone had brushed tar or black sealant long ago to keep out damp. He thought of his father's hands doing that work, patient and exact, the same hands that had taught him to never force a hinge, never rush a repair, never trust the first answer a broken thing gave you. Owen hooked 2 fingers through the iron pole and lifted. The panel opened heavier than expected, rising with the reluctant weight of something that had slept for decades. Cold air breathed up from below, carrying the smell of packed earth, old paper, oil, and stone. Atlas leaned forward, nostrils flaring, then gave one low sound from deep in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. Owen reached for the kerosene lamp on the shelf, then changed his mind and took the flashlight from his jacket pocket. The beam cut downward, catching the top of a narrow ladder built into the earth wall, its wooden rungs dark but sturdy. The space below was not deep, perhaps 8 feet, but the darkness made it feel older than distance. Owen lowered one boot onto the first rung and tested it. The wood held. Atlas watched him with an expression so intent it almost seemed human. "Stay," Owen said gently. Atlas did not like the command, but he obeyed, settling beside the opening with his front paws close to the edge. Owen climbed down slowly, the flashlight clenched between his teeth for a moment while both hands gripped the ladder. The air cooled with each step. When his boots touched the floor below, packed dirt gave slightly under his weight. He lifted the light and saw the hidden room for the first time. It was small, no wider than a single-car garage, with low beams overhead and stone walls reinforced by old timber. A workbench stood against one side, covered with a canvas tarp gone stiff with time. On the opposite wall hung shelves holding mason jars, a coil of rope, 2 lanterns, tins of machine oil, a folded wool blanket, and a row of notebooks tied with twine. Near the far corner sat a military field radio, olive green, its metal casing dulled but intact, with headphones resting beside it like a pair of hands folded in prayer. Owen did not move for several seconds. The room was not a hiding place for treasure. It was a place for waiting. A place built by people who believed the future might someday come looking. Above him, Atlas gave a soft tap on the floor, then another. Owen looked up and saw the dog's amber eyes shining through the opening. "I am here," Owen said, his voice quieter than he intended. The words came back to him from the stone walls, gentle and thin. He stepped toward the workbench and pulled back the tarp. Dust lifted into the flashlight beam, turning the air silver. Beneath the canvas lay a wooden box, a stack of envelopes wrapped in oilcloth, a folded map, and a small framed photograph face down. Owen turned the photograph over. His father looked back at him, young and unsmiling, standing beside Samuel Reed on the cabin porch. Between them was Margaret Ellison, her hand resting on a porch rail, her eyes bright with something that might have been hope or worry. Owen set the photograph down carefully and unfolded the map. It showed Coldwater Lake and the ridge around it, drawn by hand with the precision of someone who knew every inlet, trail, and rise of land. Near the northern shore, a red circle marked the base of a lightning-split birch. Beside the circle were 3 words in his father's handwriting, Samuel's last witness. Owen felt the room narrow around him. He turned to the notebooks. The first opened with a date from October of 1974. The handwriting was William Mercer's, firm and familiar, the same slanted letters Owen had seen on birthday cards, repair labels, and boxes in the garage. The first page read, "If anyone finds this after we are gone, understand that silence was never the same as forgetting." Owen sat on the edge of the workbench, the notebook open in his lap. For years, veteran stories had seemed to him like things told at memorial breakfasts or written beneath framed photographs in county halls, polished smooth until they no longer resembled real men. But down in that cold room beneath the cabin, with dirt under his boots and his father's secret words trembling in the light, he understood that some veteran stories were not about medals, parades, or the wars printed in history books. Some were about the private promises men carried home, the burdens they tucked beneath floorboards, the truth they guarded because no one else would. A faint sound rose from above. Atlas had begun to pace near the opening, claws clicking softly against the old planks. Then the dog stopped. His ears lifted toward the north wall below, the same wall he had watched from the moment they arrived. Owen followed the beam of his flashlight across the stone. At first he saw only mortar, shadow, and the rough face of granite. Then the light caught a line cut into the lowest beam, so shallow it nearly disappeared in the grain. Owen stepped closer and brushed dust away with his sleeve. Words emerged, carved by hand, uneven but clear: "Tell Owen when he is strong enough." The flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. He stood there in the hidden room beneath Coldwater Ridge, hearing the lake move beyond the walls, feeling the old cabin settle over him like a witness, and for the first time since childhood, he felt his father not as a memory, but as a presence just beyond reach, still waiting to finish a sentence he had begun 50 years ago. Owen read the carved words until the letters stopped feeling like marks in wood and became something closer to a hand resting on his shoulder. "Tell Owen when he is strong enough." The sentence had waited in the dark longer than he had been alive, sealed beneath floorboards, beneath Margaret Ellison's silence, beneath the ordinary sounds of lake wind and settling timber. He wanted to feel angry at his father for keeping it from him, but the anger would not come cleanly. It broke apart before it reached the surface, softened by the thought of William Mercer standing in this same hidden room as a young man, probably with dirt on his boots and worry in his face, carving those words because he believed someday his son might need them. Above, Atlas gave a quiet whine, not impatient, but alert. Owen drew a slow breath and turned back to the workbench. The notebook lay open in his hands, its pages yellowed at the edges, the ink faded from black to brown. He did not read every line. Not yet. Some truths asked to be approached like old houses, one room at a time. He looked instead at the folded map with the red circle near the northern shore. Samuel's last witness. The phrase had the weight of a grave marker and the pull of a road sign. Owen gathered the notebook, the oilcloth bundle, and the photograph, then climbed the ladder with careful movements, passing each item up first to the cabin floor before pulling himself out. Atlas met him with a cold nose against his cheek. The dog smelled of cedar dust and rain, and Owen closed his eyes for 1 second against the animal's steady warmth. "You heard it first," he murmured. Atlas blinked, then turned toward the cabin door. Outside, dusk had deepened into a blue-black evening. The rain had stopped, but every branch still held water, and the world glittered faintly under the first thin wash of moonlight. Owen knew it would have been wiser to wait until morning. He had no full survey of the land, no certainty about the trail, no guarantee the old map still matched the ridge after 50 winters of storms, roots, and shifting soil. But some parts of a man did not obey caution when his father's handwriting pointed toward the dark. He put on his jacket, tucked the flashlight into one pocket, slid the notebook inside the other, and took a small folding shovel from the truck bed. Atlas stepped down from the porch before him, already facing the slope that led toward the water. The trail along Coldwater Lake was narrow and half hidden beneath wet leaves. Birch trunks shone pale among the pines, their bark catching the moonlight like strips of old paper. The lake moved quietly to Owen's right, black and silver, the surface ruffled by a wind too gentle to be seen but strong enough to carry the smell of cold water and distant smoke. Every few yards, Atlas paused to scent the ground. His pause made almost no sound. Owen followed the flashlight beam over exposed roots, flat stones, and patches of frost beginning to form in the low grass. The air grew colder near the northern shore. He could feel it slipping beneath his collar, touching the sweat at the back of his neck. It reminded him of early morning field exercises, of metal tools numbing bare fingers, of waiting in darkness for enough light to do careful work. He had always been good at careful work. Even after everything else in life became uncertain, his hands still understood patience. After a quarter mile, Atlas stopped so suddenly that Owen nearly stepped into him. The dog stood at the edge of a small clearing where the trees opened toward the lake. In the center rose a birch split by lightning long ago, one half dead and gray, the other still living, its few remaining leaves trembling like small gold flags. Owen lifted the map and shone the flashlight across it. The shape of the shoreline matched. The stone outcrop matched. The tree, impossible as it seemed, still stood exactly where William had marked it. Atlas lowered his head and moved toward the base of the birch, sniffing in widening circles. Then he froze. His ears tilted forward, and his front paw pressed into the earth once, twice, 3 times. Owen knelt beside him. The soil beneath the leaves looked undisturbed at first, packed hard by years of rain and roots. But when he brushed the leaves aside, he saw a small rusted marker nearly swallowed by moss, a square of metal no larger than his palm, stamped with the letters Sir Samuel Reed. Owen felt the quiet widen around him. The lake, the trees, the cabin behind him, even the stars beginning to break through the clouds seemed to lean closer. He unfolded the shovel and began to dig. He worked slowly, not because the soil was deep, but because the act felt almost sacred. This was not a search for treasure. It was an opening of something entrusted. Dirt lifted in dark, damp pieces. Roots tangled across the hole like old fingers. Atlas stayed beside him, calm and watchful, occasionally lowering his nose to the ground as if confirming the direction. After perhaps 18 inches, the shovel struck metal with a soft, final sound. Owen stopped at once. He cleared the remaining soil by hand, his fingers cold and muddy, until the top of a steel tube appeared, sealed at both ends and wrapped in decayed canvas. It was about 2 feet long, heavy when he lifted it free, and marked with another set of initials, W.M., M.E., S.R. William Mercer. Margaret Ellison. Samuel Reed. 3 names bound together in rust, earth, and time. Owen carried it back to the cabin under a sky now scattered with stars. He did not hurry. Atlas walked close, occasionally looking up at him with that same solemn gaze, as though he understood that the object in Owen's arms was not dangerous, only heavy in the way memory could be heavy. Inside, Owen placed the steel tube on the maple table and lit the kerosene lamp. Its warm glow filled the cabin with a trembling amber light. The world outside became dark glass in the windows. He used a rag and a small wrench from his truck to loosen the cap. It turned reluctantly, then opened with a dry scrape. From inside he drew a second bundle of oilcloth, sealed tighter than the first. Within it were letters, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case, and a thin stack of documents bearing the faded seal of Aroostook County. The top page carried Samuel Reed's full name. Beneath it, in formal language, was an accusation tied to the fire that destroyed the Coldwater Boatworks in 1974. Owen sat down slowly. The story began to assemble itself not as a clean line, but as fragments: a man blamed, a town relieved to have an answer, a father who had not believed the answer, a widow who had guarded the pieces until death gave her permission to let them go. Atlas rested his head on Owen's boot. The cabin was very still. Owen lifted the cassette and turned it in the lamplight. On its label, written in handwriting that was not his father's, were 5 words: "For the day someone listens." Owen did not play the tape right away. He sat with it in his palm beneath the amber glow of the kerosene lamp, studying the cracked plastic case as if the small rectangle might breathe. Outside, Coldwater Lake moved against the shore with a soft, patient rhythm, and the cabin answered in oldwood sounds: tiny creaks from the beams, a settling sigh from the north wall, the faint tick of cooling metal in the stove. Atlas lay at Owen's feet, but the dog did not sleep. His ears remained half raised, listening to the room beneath the room, to the lake beyond the glass, to whatever thin thread of memory had pulled them both here through rain and disappointment. Owen set the cassette on the table and opened the county documents first. The paper had aged to the color of weak tea, but the words were still sharp enough to cut through 50 years. Coldwater Boatworks. October 1974. Fire reported shortly after midnight. Property loss severe. No lives lost. Suspect identified as Samuel Elias Reed, age 37, former United States Army mechanic, recently returned to Aroostook County. Owen read the sentence again. No lives lost. The phrase stood alone, clean and official, as if it explained everything. But tucked behind the report were 3 handwritten statements, each one copied by William Mercer, each one saying the same thing in different frightened voices. There had been children inside the old storage loft that night, 2 of them, hiding during a church youth scavenger game that had wandered too close to the boatworks. Samuel Reed had found them, carried them out through the side office, and sent them running toward the road before the town siren ever sounded. Owen leaned back, his chair complaining softly beneath him. The official report did not mention children. It did not mention rescue. It did not mention that Samuel had walked into the smokelit yard with one sleeve burned at the cuff and soot across his face, only to be met by men already eager to name someone responsible. Owen turned another page. There were notes in his father's handwriting along the margins, careful and tense. Samuel did not start it. Ask about the fuel drums. Ask who moved the ledger. Ask why the north gate was unlocked. Owen could almost hear William's voice in those lines, not loud, never dramatic, but steady with the stubbornness of a man who could not ignore a crooked beam once he had seen it. The next document carried Margaret Ellison's signature as a witness. She had worked at the county clinic then. She had treated Samuel's hands that morning and written that his injuries matched rescue, not escape. Her statement had been filed, then misplaced, then returned with no official action. Owen placed the papers in a neat stack, because order was the only way he knew to keep emotion from spilling over. Atlas lifted his head and touched the edge of the table with his nose. The cassette waited between them. Owen looked toward the hidden floor panel near the fireplace, still open, dark as a question. Down below, on the workbench, the old field radio sat beside its headphones. He understood then that the tape did not belong in a modern machine, even if he had one. It belonged where they had left it. He gathered the cassette, the lamp, and the flashlight, then climbed down again into the hidden room while Atlas watched from above, tense but obedient. The air below seemed colder now, or maybe Owen was finally aware of how long it had been sealed away from ordinary life. He set the lamp on the workbench. Its flame trembled, gilding the stone walls and the carved message in the beam. "Tell Owen when he is strong enough." The radio was heavier than it looked. Owen ran his fingers over the casing, finding dust, old scratches, a faded service number, and a strip of masking tape marked with his father's initials. The machine had been modified. A small cassette deck had been fitted into the side with soldered wires and patient hands, the kind of repair William Mercer would have considered inelegant but necessary. Owen checked the battery compartment. Empty. He found an old power cord coiled behind the unit, followed it to a wall outlet that should not have worked, then realized the line had been run upward through the cabin and tied into the main panel. His father had thought of everything. Of course he had. Owen climbed back up, opened the electrical box near the kitchen, and reset a breaker labeled in pencil, "Lower room." The cabin lights flickered once. Beneath the floor came a faint hum. Atlas stood, ears high, eyes locked on the opening. Owen returned to the hidden room and pressed the radio switch. Static rose softly, a ghostly winter sound, like snow brushing against a window screen. He slid the cassette into the deck. His thumb hovered over the play button for several seconds. He thought of his father at 40, close to the same age Owen was now, carrying this secret while raising a boy, paying bills, fixing trucks, saying grace over simple dinners, never once letting the burden show plainly enough for his son to understand. Then Owen pressed play. The tape clicked. The reels turned. For a moment there was only hiss, then a man's voice emerged, fragile with age and distance, but clear enough to make the hidden room feel suddenly occupied. "My name is Samuel Elias Reed, and if anyone is hearing this, then William kept his word longer than I deserved." Owen stopped breathing for a heartbeat. Above him, Atlas gave a soft whine. The voice continued, calm, tired, touched by the rural Maine cadence of another generation. "I did not set fire to Coldwater Boatworks. I was there because I saw the north office light on after closing, and I knew something was wrong. 2 children were trapped in the loft. I got them out. That is the part they buried first." Owen closed his eyes. The tape crackled, then steadied. Samuel spoke of the town as it had been then, the boatworks that employed half the county, the owner whose family name sat on library plaques in church windows, the young men returning from service who were welcomed with handshakes in public and suspicion in private. He did not sound bitter. That somehow made it harder to hear. He sounded like a man trying to place truth on a table without breaking anything else. He said the fire had begun after someone mishandled fuel stored illegally in the north office. He said a ledger proved it. He said the owner's son had begged him not to speak until the children were safe, until the company could survive, until the town could breathe again. Then days became weeks, and the story hardened around Samuel like poured concrete. Owen stood motionless in the lamplight, hands resting on the workbench. The voice on the tape grew softer. "William believed me. Margaret believed me. They wanted to fight it then, but I asked them to wait. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had seen enough broken families and thought silence could spare one more. The static deepened for a moment, then cleared. If William's boy ever hears this, tell him his father was a good man. Tell him a good man cannot save every truth in his own lifetime. Sometimes he can only keep it warm until another set of hands is ready. Owen bowed his head. The hidden room blurred around the edges, not from weakness, but from recognition. Veteran stories were often told as if courage ended when the uniform came off, but here was another kind of courage, quieter, lonelier, stretched across half a century beneath a cabin floor. Then Samuel's voice gave one final instruction. The ledger is still where the cold water cannot reach it, under the third stone by the old boathouse foundation. Let the dog lead you if he is anything like the shepherd William said your boy would have someday. He laughed once, a gentle, astonished sound. Dogs know where men hide the truth. The tape clicked, then fell into silence. Owen stood in the golden hush, listening to the reel stop turning. Above him, Atlas barked once, clear and certain, facing the north wall as if the night outside had just opened another door. Owen climbed out of the hidden room with the cassette still warm from the machine in his imagination, though the plastic was cold against his palm. Atlas stood at the open cabin door, body angled toward the lake, ears lifted into the night. The dog had not pushed the door open, Owen had left it latched. Yet the latch now rested loose against the frame, and a narrow ribbon of wind moved through the room, carrying the scent of wet stone, cold water, and something older, something metallic beneath the earth. Owen looked from the door to Atlas, then to the north-facing windows where Coldwater Lake lay black and silver under a sky crowded with stars. The sensible part of him said morning would be better. A veteran learned to respect darkness, distance, and terrain. He had no reason to cross unknown ground at night for a ledger that had waited 50 years already. But Samuel Reed's voice still filled the cabin, gentle and tired, and beneath it was his father's silence, not empty now, but purposeful. Owen placed the cassette inside his jacket pocket, folded the county papers into the oilcloth, and took the flashlight from the table. Atlas stepped onto the porch before him, not rushing, not pulling, simply moving with the certainty of a creature following a truth people had buried too carefully. The night had turned clear and cold. The kind of cold that made breath visible and sharpened every sound until the world seemed made of glass. Frost silvered the porch rail. The lake below reflected the stars in broken pieces, shifting them with each small movement of water. Owen locked the cabin behind him, though the gesture felt strange now, as if locking a place that had guarded secrets longer than any man could. They followed the shoreline beyond the lightning-split birch, farther north than they had gone before. The trail narrowed until it became no trail at all, only a faint depression through tall grass and low brush glazed with frost. Atlas led with his nose low, sometimes pausing at flat stones or fallen branches, sometimes lifting his head toward the wind as if listening for Samuel Reed's directions inside the movement of the trees. Owen moved behind him with steady, careful steps, flashlight beam held low to protect his night vision. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The cabin disappeared behind the curve of the ridge, leaving only the lake, the woods, and the soft sound of his own boots against damp earth. He thought of the phrase old boathouse foundation. Margaret had never mentioned a boathouse in her letter. The attorney had not either. Yet as the shoreline bent into a shallow cove, Owen saw it, a low rectangle of stones near the waterline, half covered in moss and dead leaves, the remains of a building long surrendered to weather. A few rotted posts leaned out of the lake like tired fingers. Beside them, a narrow strip of broken concrete sloped into the water, where boats must have been launched when the county still believed in summer gatherings and honest work lasting forever. Atlas stopped at the foundation and circled once. His paws moved carefully over the stones. Then he stood beside the third large stone from the corner nearest the lake, lowered his head, and let out one low breath. Owen crouched. The stone was flat, dark, and wider than a serving tray, with moss along its edges and a hairline crack through the center. He brushed it clean with his glove. Nothing marked it. No initials. No carved sign. Just a stone placed among other stones, ordinary enough to vanish inside memory. That, Owen thought, was how people hid things best. Not in places no one could find, but in places no one thought to question. He worked his fingers along the edge and found a gap. The stone shifted with a sound like old teeth grinding. It was heavy, but not impossible. He set his shoulder behind it, used the folding shovel as a lever, and lifted slowly until the earth beneath opened in a shallow pocket lined with rusted tin. Inside lay a metal cash box, smaller than he expected, wrapped in blackened canvas and sealed with 2 strips of waxed cloth. Owen lifted it out and rested it on his knees. Atlas sat beside him, watching the box, calm now, his work completed for the moment. The lock had corroded, but the hinge gave when Owen worked it gently with the shovel edge. The lid opened. Inside was not money, not gold, not anything a man could spend. There was a ledger bound in cracked brown leather, its corners rounded from use. Beneath it were 3 photographs and a folded newspaper clipping from 1974. Owen opened the ledger under the flashlight. The pages listed shipments, fuel purchases, repair orders, and hand-signed approvals from Coldwater Boat Works. Near the final entries, several lines were circled in red pencil. Fuel drums moved to North Office. Storage violation noted. Inspection delayed by order of Harlan Voss Sr. Owen recognized the name from one of the county documents. The owner. A man whose family name still sat on the town library, the clinic wing, and maybe half the polite silences in a rustic county. Owen turned the page. The last entry was written in another hand, hurried but legible. James Voss moved the drums after dark. Children seen near loft. Samuel went in after them. Tell the truth. No signature, only initials that matched a witness statement William had copied. Owen sat back on his heels, feeling the cold seep through his jeans. This was the missing piece. Not a rumor. Not a memory. A record. The simple, stubborn kind of truth that paper could carry when people failed to. Across the water, a light appeared in the distance, high on the ridge road. A vehicle moved slowly between the trees, then stopped. Owen turned off his flashlight at once. Atlas stood, silent, body close to Owen's side. The night returned around them, deep and listening. The vehicle remained still for several seconds, then continued along the far road until the trees swallowed its glow. It might have been nothing. A local driving home late. A hunter checking land. A neighbor on the ridge. But Owen had lived too long by instinct to dismiss the tightening in his chest. Some stories did not rise from the ground without disturbing those who had built their lives above them. He wrapped the ledger back in canvas, held it against his coat, and began the walk back with Atlas at his side. The dog did not lead now. He guarded. Every few yards he looked behind them, ears turning toward the woods, not frightened, only aware. When the cabin finally came back into view, its windows dark and quiet beneath the pines, Owen felt both relief and responsibility settle over him. Inside, he placed the ledger on the maple table beside Samuel's tape, William's notebook, Margaret's letter, and the old photograph. 4 pieces of a life, 4 witnesses gathered beneath one roof after half a century apart. Atlas rested near the door, facing outward. Owen did not sleep that night. He sat by the cold fireplace until dawn thinned the windows with gray light, reading the ledger line by line, hearing Samuel's voice between the entries, seeing his father's handwriting in the margins of memory. By morning, the cabin no longer felt like an inheritance. It felt like a courtroom, a chapel, and a home all at once, waiting for one tired man to decide whether truth was still worth carrying into town. Morning came without warmth, only a pale silver light spreading over Coldwater Lake and laying itself across the cabin floor like a folded sheet. Owen had spent the night at the maple table with the evidence arranged before him in careful rows, not because anyone was there to inspect it, but because order helped him breathe. Samuel Reed's tape sat beside the old field notes. William Mercer's notebook lay open near the ledger from the Boathouse Foundation. Margaret Ellison's letter rested beneath the lamp, its pages softened from being read too many times in too few hours. Atlas had remained by the door until first light, refusing the blanket Owen placed near the stove, his body turned toward the woods as if the night still had business outside. When dawn finally touched the windows, the dog stood, stretched, and crossed the room to place his head on Owen's knee. The gesture broke something loose in Owen, not dramatically, not in the way movies like to show men breaking, but quietly, like ice giving way along the edge of a pond. He set one hand on Atlas's neck and felt the strong pulse beneath the fur. "We take it in," he said. His voice sounded rough from silence. Atlas gave a soft breath, as if the plan had been obvious since the first hollow tap beneath the hearth. By 8 o'clock, Owen had packed the documents in a dry canvas tool bag, wrapped the cassette in Margaret's oilcloth, and placed the ledger between two pieces of cardboard so the binding would not crack. He changed into the cleanest clothes he had, dark jeans, a gray thermal shirt, his weathered brown jacket, and the pair of boots he still polished out of habit though no inspection would ever come. The old army watch on his wrist had stopped twice over the years and started again each time he tapped the glass. That morning, it ticked steadily. The drive into town took 40 minutes along roads bright with wet leaves and low morning fog. Coldwater Village was smaller than Millbrook, tucked between a ridge and a river, with brick storefronts, a white courthouse, a small library funded by the Voss family, and an American flag lifting gently outside the county records office. Owen parked near the diner because the courthouse lot was full of pickup trucks and late-model sedans. Atlas stepped down beside him, calm and close, his black N10 coat shining in the thin light. A few people turned to look. They saw a stranger first, then the dog, then the canvas bag in his hand. In small towns, news sometimes traveled before footsteps, and Owen felt the air change around him before anyone spoke. He entered the county records office beneath a brass bell that chimed once above the door. The room smelled of paper, floor wax, and burnt coffee. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 60s with silver glasses and a cardigan the color of oatmeal. Her nameplate read Ruth Delaney. She looked at Atlas, then at Owen, and her expression softened with the practiced kindness of someone who had spent years helping people find proof that something had happened. "Can I help you?" she asked. Owen placed the canvas bag carefully on the counter. "I need to speak with whoever handles archived case corrections," he said. "It concerns Coldwater Boat Works in 1974. The room became very still. Ruth's hand paused above her keyboard. Across the office, an older man searching through property maps lifted his head. The copy machine stopped humming. Owen had not spoken loudly, but the name had moved through the room like a match struck in church. Ruth studied him more closely now. "That is an old matter," she said. "Most of those files are closed." Owen nodded. "Some of them were never complete." Before Ruth could answer, a door opened behind the counter and a tall elderly man stepped out, leaning on a cane polished smooth by use. His hair was white, his suit dark, his face narrow and carefully composed. Owen recognized him from one of the copied statements in William's notebook, though the handwriting had belonged to a younger deputy. Martin Hale, former sheriff's officer, witness to the inquiry. A man who had written that Samuel Reed appeared confused and unwilling to explain himself, while leaving out the two children he had saved. Martin looked at Owen's face, then at the dog, then at the bag on the counter. In his eyes, something old tightened. "You are William Mercer's boy," he said. Owen did not ask how he knew. "I am." Martin came closer, each step measured. "Your father was a decent man." "I know." "Then you should know he chose peace." Owen felt Atlas shift beside him, not threatening, only present, a steady warmth against his leg. "No," Owen said quietly. "He chose patience." "That is not the same thing." Ruth lowered her eyes. The old man at the map table folded his papers and left without making a sound. Martin rested both hands on his cane. For a moment, he looked less like a warning and more like a tired witness who had spent 50 years hoping the door would never open. "There were families involved," Martin said. "Children. Jobs. A town that would have folded if the boatworks went down." Owen unwrapped the ledger and placed it on the counter with a care that made the room feel almost ceremonial. A man carried blame that was not his. Martin's jaw moved slightly. "Samuel asked for silence." "The tape says he asked for time." "Not forever." The color left Martin's face in degrees. Ruth looked up sharply at the word tape. Owen removed the cassette from the oilcloth, then William's notebook, then Margaret's signed statement, then the copied medical note from the clinic. He laid them out one by one, each piece quiet, modest, unadorned, but together strong enough to bend the shape of the past. Martin stared at the cassette as if it were alive. "Margaret kept that," he whispered. Owen answered gently. "Margaret kept everything.
For the first time, Martin sat down.
Not behind the authority of a desk, but in a plain wooden chair near the counter, his cane across his knees. The years seemed to settle on him all at once.
I was 29, he said. I had a wife, a baby, and a badge I thought meant I was helping. Harlan Voss owned half the county. His son made a foolish mistake. Samuel saved those children, that much is true. But Samuel also begged us not to ruin the town over it. He said he could live with people thinking poorly of him if the children were spared being dragged through it. Owen listened, and the anger he expected still did not arrive the way he thought it would. It came mixed with sorrow, with the terrible understanding that people often called fear by nobler names when they needed to sleep at night. Martin looked toward Atlas, whose amber eyes remained fixed on him with uncanny calm. Your father came back again and again, Martin said. He wanted the record amended. He wanted Samuel honored. I told him to leave it alone. Margaret never forgave me. Ruth removed her glasses and wiped them with a tissue. There is a process, she said softly, though her voice had changed. It no longer carried hesitation. If the materials are authentic, we can petition the County Historical Board and the clerk's office for a corrected public record. The tape would need to be digitized. The ledger examined. The statement notarization verified. Do it, Martin said. Ruth looked at him. Martin. The old man closed his eyes. Do it while I can still sign my name to what I should have signed then. Owen stood in the morning light of the records office with Atlas beside him, feeling the strange weight of mercy settle over the room. This was not the thunderous justice people imagined when secrets were uncovered. It was slower, quieter, made of paper clips, sworn statements, trembling hands, and an old man finally choosing truth while there was still breath enough to speak it. Ruth made copies. Martin gave a statement. Owen called Denise Callahan, the attorney, who arrived before noon with a scanner, a legal pad, and eyes that grew wet when she heard Samuel's voice crackle through a borrowed cassette player in the back office. By early afternoon, the first official petition had been filed. Samuel Elias Reed's name, buried for half a century beneath accusation and silence, had begun its careful return to daylight. When Owen stepped outside, the town looked the same and not the same. The diner windows gleamed. The courthouse flag moved in the wind. Somewhere, a church bell marked the hour. Atlas leaned lightly against his leg, and Owen looked toward the ridge road leading back to the cabin. For the first time, he understood that his father had not left him a burden. He had left him a bridge. And all Owen had to do now was cross it, one honest step at a time. By the time Owen returned to Coldwater Ridge, the afternoon had softened into a clear autumn gold that touched the tops of the pines and turned the lake into a long mirror of quiet light. He drove slowly up the private road, not because the gravel was rough, but because something inside him no longer felt hunted. Atlas sat beside him with his head high, the way he had sat during long drives after hard days, when words were unnecessary and the road itself seemed to carry the weight for both of them. The cabin appeared through the trees as it had the evening before, weathered, still, and patient, but Owen saw it differently now. It was no longer a shelter given by a stranger at the edge of ruin. It was the last living room of a promise, a place where William Mercer, Margaret Ellison, and Samuel Reed had trusted the future to arrive in the shape of a man who had almost stopped believing he had one. Owen parked near the split rail fence and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. In the bed of the truck were groceries from the village market, a bag of dog food, a bundle of firewood, and a new legal folder from Ruth Delaney, stamped with the first official receipt of the petition. It was not victory yet. Not the kind newspapers rushed to print or people argued about in front of cameras. It was smaller, but truer. It was the first clean stitch in a wound that had been covered too long. Atlas nudged his shoulder. Owen looked at him and nodded. Home, he said, testing the word softly. The dog's tail moved once against the seat. Over the next weeks, Coldwater Ridge changed by inches. Owen patched the porch steps, sealed the north window, cleared leaves from the gutters, and stacked split maple beside the shed until the rows stood even and proud. He repaired the stovepipe, tightened the loose hinge on the green door, and rebuilt the dock with boards bought from a lumberyard that did not ask why his hands still shook slightly when the wind came sharp off the water.
Each morning, he drank coffee from a blue enamel mug while Atlas patrolled the shoreline, nose low, tail steady, carrying himself like the guardian of a story now safely awake. The county process moved slowly, as honest things often do. The ledger was verified by an archivist from Bangor. The tape was digitized, cleaned, and preserved. Margaret's clinic statement was matched to an old registry. Martin Hale signed his sworn correction on a rainy Thursday, his handwriting uneven but readable, then asked Owen to tell Samuel's family that cowardice sometimes wore a badge and called itself duty, but regret did not have to be the final record of a man. Owen did not know what to say to that. He only shook Martin's hand and felt the frailty of time beneath the old man's skin. In early November, Ruth found Samuel Reed's daughter living outside Portland. Her name was Clara Whitcomb. She was 72, a retired school librarian with silver hair, gentle brown eyes, and the careful posture of someone who had carried family shame without ever being told why it belonged to her. She came to Coldwater Ridge on a Sunday afternoon, driven by her grandson in a navy blue sedan. Owen met them at the porch with Atlas beside him. Clara stepped out slowly, holding a small purse in both hands. For a long moment she looked at the cabin, the lake, the birches, the old boathouse cove in the distance. Then she looked at Owen. "My mother told me never to ask about this place," she said. Her voice did not tremble, but her eyes did. Owen led her inside. The fire was burning low on the stone hearth. On the maple table lay copies of the documents, the photograph of Samuel with William and Margaret, and the restored audio file ready to play through a small speaker Ruth had loaned him from the records office. Clara stood before the photograph as if it were a window. She touched the edge of the frame with one finger. "I was told he left because he was ashamed," she whispered. Owen waited. Some silences deserved room. When he played Samuel's voice, the cabin seemed to gather around them, holding the sound gently. Clara listened without sitting down. Her grandson stood behind her with one hand near her shoulder. Atlas lay by the hearth, eyes half closed, but his ears remained lifted. Samuel's words filled the room across 50 years, not polished, not heroic, simply human. "I did not set fire to Coldwater Boat Works. I got them out. That is the part they buried first." Clara covered her mouth with both hands. When the recording ended, she did not cry loudly. She bowed her head and let the tears fall in silence, the way people do when grief and relief are too old to separate. Owen placed William's notebook beside her. "My father believed him," he said. Clara nodded, still looking at the photograph. "Then your father gave mine more than he knew." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and for a moment the cabin felt less like wood and stone than like a heart remembering how to beat. The corrected record was approved before Thanksgiving. The County Historical Board issued a formal amendment. Coldwater Village placed a modest plaque near the old boathouse foundation, naming Samuel Elias Reed as the man who saved 2 children and bore silence longer than any community had the right to ask. There was a small gathering on a cold morning with coffee and paper cups, veterans in worn caps, a pastor from the white church, Ruth with a folder under her arm, Martin Hale sitting quietly in the front row, and Clara holding a folded handkerchief. Owen stood near the back with Atlas, not wanting attention, but Clara turned and reached for his hand before the pastor spoke. "You brought him home," she said. Owen looked at the lake, at the pale sun breaking through cloud, at the breath of every person rising into the cold air like prayers made visible. "No," he said softly. "He was waiting. We just finally listened." Winter arrived in patient layers after that. Snow gathered along the porch rail. The lake hardened at the edges. Smoke rose each morning from the chimney in a thin blue ribbon. Owen did not return to Millbrook. He called Denise Callahan and signed the final inheritance papers, then registered the cabin under a new name, Coldwater Veterans Rest. Not a business at first. Not a grand plan. Just a promise with walls. A place where veterans passing through northern Maine could sit by a fire, drink coffee, walk beside the lake, bring their service dogs, and remember that coming home was not a single day on a calendar, but a road some men and women walked for years. He fixed the spare room. Then the loft. Then the little shed near the dock. Local volunteers brought blankets, canned goods, tools, and a stack of used books from the library.
Ruth donated copies of local veteran stories for the shelf. Clara sent a framed photograph of Samuel, restored in clear, with a note taped to the back, "Let the truth keep someone else warm."
On the first heavy snow of December, Owen stood on the porch at dusk, watching Atlas move through the yard with soft prints following him like punctuation across the white ground.
The cabin windows glowed behind them.
Inside, the old field radio rested on the mantel, silent now, not because it had nothing left to say, but because its message had been heard.
Owen thought of the mill yard in the rain, the cardboard box, the final paycheck, the terrible emptiness of having nowhere to go.
He thought of Margaret writing his name year after year. He thought of William carving words beneath the floor. He thought of Samuel waiting in a cassette tape, patient as winter, faithful as stone.
Atlas climbed the steps and leaned against his leg.
Owen placed a hand on the dog's head, feeling snow melt into the thick fur. Across the lake, the last light slipped behind the ridge, and the world became blue, quiet, and impossibly kind. He had not found riches beneath the cabin. He had found something far more difficult to lose: a father's unfinished love, a stranger's restored honor, a home built from truth, and a reason to keep the fire burning for the next soul who arrived tired from the road. Perhaps that was the miracle all along. Not that a broken man inherited a cabin, but that the cabin inherited him back, board by board, breath by breath, until he finally understood that some promises do not end when people leave this world. They wait in the dark, listening for the faithful footsteps of those still willing to do what is right.